Hello, my name is Justin Wood. I work at the Economist Corporate Network, where I look after the Southeast Asia region. And I'm here today to give you a quick summary of an Economist Corporate Network lunch that we've just staged. The title of the lunch was Data Privacy in Asia, Navigating Risk on the Big Data Seas, very generously supported by SafeNet. As the title of the event suggests, the theme of the lunch was all around the proliferation of data that we see these days. Data just blossoming, which presents huge opportunities for companies if they can figure out how to capture this data and use it, but equally presents huge challenges because they have to manage the data in the correct way. And of course, data privacy is a big part of managing data properly. We had about 25 people here at the lunch, and it was an open discussion, very wide-ranging in its content, from issues that were very sort of high level and philosophical down to day-to-day frontline management issues of how to manage data security, data privacy. So let me just run through some of the ideas and themes that were discussed today, and this is a very brief summary. We talked about what does data privacy mean to a company? Why are they managing data privacy? Is it merely a compliance issue? Is it a risk management issue? Is it all about reputation? Is it more than that? Is it a source of competitive advantage that you manage your data privacy better than your competitors, for example? And the answer was all of the above. Yes, it's a compliance issue. Yes, it's about managing risk and reputation, but equally it can and is a source of competitive advantage. So people shouldn't think about it only in compliance and risk terms. There was a strong consensus that this idea of data privacy and the challenges of managing it are only going to become more and more important, partly from a regulatory perspective, but equally from a customer perspective. Customers and consumers are going to demand that their data is used much more sensitively and safely. Interestingly, we had some people talking around the whole idea of compliance with laws and whether companies should even be thinking about the issues of data privacy in those terms. One of the people at our lunch today was actually a lawyer, and he interestingly said that he advises companies not to try to comply with the law, but rather to think about data privacy in different ways, more to think about a culture that you need to introduce and instill within your companies. And the reason for this is because data privacy laws are not black and white. They're very open to interpretation. They're still being formed. In many jurisdictions, they're still very young. And so companies should think about data security, data privacy at a much more fundamental level rather than just tick boxing on a sort of a compliance sheet, because these laws really are very, very open to interpretation. So it's more of a cultural issue than it is a compliance issue. We had lots of discussion around the nature of data breaches, data leakage, how things go wrong in terms of managing data privacy. People still believe that internal sources are as big a risk as ever, that it's down to employee carelessness and employee fraud and bad processes that data becomes insecure and leaks out and isn't used correctly. But equally, there was a strong sense, particularly amongst the banks who are with us, that the external attacks on their organizations are increasing. The value of data is becoming greater. So if you're, for example, running a credit card operation and you outsource your operations to, say, a service center in India, the chances are that employees at that service center are now being targeted by external sources to trade and sell those credit card information. And these attacks rising, certainly according to the people at our lunch today. There's also a sense that data privacy can be breached unintentionally. Companies gather huge amounts of data around their customers and they gather it for a purpose. But business models change, and as they do, that data can then be used in ways that it wasn't originally intended to be used. And that can cause breaches of privacy because the data is sort of moving away from its original purpose. So that's a risk that companies need to manage and be aware of. We talked about some of the solutions to some of these things. They're a very wide-ranging discussion, but one interesting idea is that certain of the companies here no longer allow their employees to store data on their laptops. Everything is held in a cloud, whether it's a private cloud run by the company or a more public cloud. But certainly the idea that laptops are a vulnerability and a risk, and if they're stolen, of course, and traded, they can be a huge breach of data privacy and data security. We had many fundamental sort of philosophical debates as well. One in particular was around who owns data. Do customers own their own data? Are we entering into an era where these ideas are going to be changing? Do customers even care about data privacy? We live in a world where people receive huge numbers of services for free, things like Facebook and YouTube and Gmail and so on and so forth. And the price for getting these services for free is that you give up your information. Is that model going to continue into the future? Or is there going to be a consumer and a customer backlash against this idea of paying for services by trading data? There was a sense that in Asia, there's a very wide naivety around how much information people are giving away. They don't realize quite how open they're being and how much of their personal lives are being traded in exchange for some of these services. And some concerns voiced that as realization grows, that there's going to be a backlash from customers and consumers concerned around how much data they're giving away and how it's being used. We had other philosophical debates. One in particular that was interesting was this whole idea of privacy versus anonymity. The idea that there's some data that you want to be private and is not shared, it's yours and it goes nowhere else. And other types of data where you want it to be anonymous, but you also want to share it. So for example, a private set of data might be pictures of you and your family on a holiday. You don't want that shared. Anonymous data that you want to be shared might be your health records. So, health research requires large databases, and people should, or may want to rather, share their data in order to add to the public knowledge, but they don't necessarily want their data to be associated with them. So the differentiation between private data and anonymous data was one that we touched on and debated. And I think related to that is the idea that can you ever get your data back? Once the data's out there, is it a one-way street? Do you own the data, as I mentioned earlier, or does it then become in the public domain and there's no way of clawing it back? So many fundamental issues and concerns and challenges for companies as we enter into this era of big data, and lots of ideas that need to be discussed and thought about, but certainly a very broad and fascinating subject.